Week 13 is officially here, and today I got you guys covered with my top 40 wide receivers in the tier list format I bring you guys every single week. There is 2 weeks left in the fantasy football regular season. If you haven't already clinched your spot, now is go time. You can't afford to make the wrong decision, and I'll try to help you guys out as much as possible. But before we get into the official top 40, we go through the will they play tier. And honestly, just going over a couple guys that are realistically going to be expected to play. Chris Olave, obviously dealing with back spasms, appeared in Wednesday's practice. He did return to practice on Friday. Does sound like he's going to be making his return to the lineup this week, and he's going to be a strong option. We'll talk about him later on, but Chris Olave, I am not expecting any limitations in this game. And the same applies to Marvin Harrison Jr. If he does play, I do expect him to be fully healthy, coming off of appendicitis that's been keeping him out. We've seen how much the Arizona Cardinals have thrown the football, and we'll talk about Marvin Harrison in a little bit. DK Metcalf, wide receiver of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I have my own on-field concerns, but it does sound like he's expected to play in this game with the ankle injury he suffered last week. And finally, Drake London, already ruled out, dealing with that PCL sprain. He could potentially return to your lineup in week 14. But moving on to the official tier list, we start off with my tier number 1, the top 2. Jamar Chase, who played on Thursday, and Jackson Smith-Njigba, of course, playing the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday. Jamar Chase obviously locked in as my wide receiver 1. And it's pretty simple. I mean, when you look at his past game logs, the guy has been an absolute force. Games, 12 targets, 23 targets, 19 targets, and then we do see 10 targets as well against the Steelers. It's unfortunate. I mean, realistically, he didn't have the biggest of games. We see 18 PPR points. But at the same time, given the return of Burrow, 46 pass attempts in this game, 14 targets for Jamar Chase. All we take away from this going forward is that Jamar Chase is an every week top end wide receiver 1. But my wide receiver 2 set this week, and it's actually the wide receiver 1 in fantasy so far this year. Man, Jackson Smith-Njigba has been on a completely different level as of late. As you guys can see, since week 5 against the Buccaneers, wide receiver 3 on the week, 3, 7, 7, 9, 7, and of course the wide receiver 1 on the week against Tennessee. This guy's been an absolute machine, man. Not many wide receivers can score 20 plus PPR points in 7 straight games, and obviously we have a great game environment given how strong the Seattle offense has been. And the fact that JSN has been this productive on a team that is currently averaging the second fewest passing attempts per game just speaks volume to how dominant he's been. He's been fantastic. Over 23 points per game is no joke, and he's posted 90 plus receiving yards in 10 of his last 11 games. But moving on to tier number 2, and we got the other high-end wide receiver 1s. We got the guys that you could put into your lineup 18 to 20 type of points per game, and they're going to be rock solid number 1 options. We start at the top here, the guys that played on Thursday, Rashee Rice and CeeDee Lamb. We have Puka Nacua, Davante Adams of the LA Rams, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Again, we'll talk about his injury in a little bit. And then George Pickens ended up as my wide receiver 8 coming into the week. Starting at the top here with number 3 and number 4. Yes, coming into the week, I did have CeeDee Lamb ranked above George Pickens, and obviously he's the one with the big game. My rationale was the fact that CeeDee Lamb, primary slot wide receiver in relation to his usage versus Pickens. Trent McDuffie has only really shadowed 20.3% of the snaps in the slot. But realistically, it just didn't matter, man. CeeDee Lamb, it looked like he was motivated, looked like he played up to the level we know he's capable of, and we saw what the end result was. 9 targets, 7 receptions, 112 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown, 24.2 PPR points. So yes, I feel very good knowing that I ranked him as the number 1 Cowboy and the number 4 overall wide receiver on the slate. And he came just behind Rashee Rice, man. Rashee Rice, absolutely automatic against the Cowboys defense. 29.4 PPR points. He's been so good since he's come back to the lineup. I mean, we checked the game log. Since he's returned, man, 23.2 points, 25.5, 18.6. Does have the down week against Denver, but who doesn't have a down week against Denver? And then we have 24.1 and 29.4. As long as Patrick Mahomes has started, man, this guy is a high-end wide receiver on each and every week, and I think we have to consider him a top 5 wide receiver moving forward. But moving on to number 5 and number 6, we have Puka Nacua and Davante Adams of the LA Rams, and man, I honestly think you can argue these guys either way, because on the season, of course, Puka has been the better option, 21 points per game versus Davante Adams, 16.6. But since Puka's returned to the lineup, man, Davante Adams is dominating the consequential targets. 62% end zone target share for Davante Adams. And when we look at the game logs, man, this guy's been automatic when it comes to scoring touchdowns. Only 3 such games this year where he hadn't scored. And as we see, 2 touchdowns last week against Tampa, 2 touchdowns against the Saints, 3 touchdowns against the Jacksonville Jaguars, man. Davante Adams, yes, he's not going to have the yardage output upside that a guy like Puka will, but at the same time, he does have the consequential scoring equity in this offense, an offense that's arguably the best in the NFL. 3+ passing touchdowns for Stafford in 4 of his last 5 games. And Davante Adams has actually been the full route share player, whereas Puka Nacua, we haven't really seen the full route. So I do still have Puka slightly higher. I do believe maybe they were easing him back from the ankle. I do still believe that if Puka's operating at that full, 80+, 90+% route share type of capacity, he's got the upside to rejoin tier 1. But for now, at the very least, he needs to be considered on par with Davante Adams. And we'll move to the other 2 wide receivers that did play on Thursday. Very unfortunate with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Goes down with what's being described as a low ankle sprain. He's expected to miss the next week or 2. So with Amon-Ra St. Brown, if you started him in your lineup, you got a goose egg. Not really anything you could have done there. Obviously, you're starting Amon-Ra St. Brown each and every week that he's healthy. Just very unfortunate that he went down before he was able to contribute some fantasy points. George Pickens, on the other hand, man, he stayed up, and he was the guy that really took the game over in the 4th quarter. He was struggling early, man. Obviously, we see the drop on the slant route. Wasn't really as engaged. CeeDee Lamb was the guy early on. But in the 4th quarter, when the game was on the line, when they needed big plays on the outside, George Pickens was delivering. 13 targets versus only 9 from CeeDee. And this is one of the few games that we've actually seen George Pickens dominate the targets. So it's fascinating. I do think this is going to be a matchup by matchup basis. Obviously, both these guys, elite level talents, connected to such a great offense. I think at the very minimum, they're each top 6 to 8 weekly wide receivers. To me, whoever's ranked higher is just basically determined on the matchup. CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, if you have both these guys, they are poised to be league winners. Moving on to tier number 3, and this is what I classify as the other wide receiver ones in fantasy this week. Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle, Ladd McConkey, and Chris Olave. We'll start off the top. Nico Collins, the wide receiver 9 for me in my rankings. Last week's game obviously was impacted. He left it for a brief period. He was dealing with that chest injury. It does sound like he's going to be fully okay. And prior to that week, he was being an absolute target alpha. 10+ targets in the 4 games prior to that, and we are getting CJ Stroud's return this week. The primary matchup of Sauce Gardner, definitely not an easy one for Nico Collins, but at the same time, man, Nico Collins has scored 17.5 points per game since he's returned to the lineup, and he's playing the best that he has all year. On top of that, CJ Stroud was looking good prior to his concussion, and he was averaging over 35 pass attempts per game. If Stroud's locked in, if he's fully healthy, I do expect the passing volume to continue, and I think Nico Collins could be a league winner down the stretch. At 10, we got Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. And when we look at since Tyreek Hill went down, so Tyreek Hill obviously goes down in that game against the New York Jets. Ever since that game, man, we have seen excellence from Jalen Waddle. Wide receiver 8 on the week, wide receiver 17, wide receiver 5, wide receiver 25, wide receiver 13. Yeah, you have a couple down weeks mixed in there. 8.2 against Washington, 2.5 against Cleveland Browns. But at the same time, he's averaging 14.9 points per game in that stretch. And it's a large sample size, man. We're talking 7 games for Jalen Waddle. And that's with Tua having his own struggles. When we look at this matchup, nearly 24 implied Dolphins points. They're at home. 4th fastest projected game of the slate. I think we have to be viewing Jalen Waddle as a wide receiver 1 on the week. Next up at wide receiver 11, we got Ladd McConkey of the LA Chargers. And the main concern as of late has been the passing volume because the Chargers just simply haven't been passing the football a ton. However, the Raiders, they are a pass funnel defense. And I think this Chargers passing offense should be able to get back on track. Despite the lowered passing volume overall, we've still seen spike weeks from Ladd McConkey. 3 20+ PPR point games in his last 6 played. And following the bye week, I expect the Chargers to sit down and figure out what was working. And what was working the most in this offense was feeding Ladd McConkey in the receiving game. We know what his trust is with Justin Herbert. Since week 5, he's been averaging 15.6 points per game. And with Omari Hampton out for yet another week, I think we see the return of the passing game. The Jaguars, they did a good job against it, but the Raiders are much worse off. So give me the higher on his 10.25 half PPR point projection over on underdog. At wide receiver 12, we got Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints going up against the Miami Dolphins. We obviously talked about his counterpart, Jalen Waddle, on the other side. With Chris Olave, it's fascinating because obviously he's listed as questionable. We don't really know the true nature of the back spasms he suffered on Wednesday. But if he plays, we have to be trusting him as a top 12 option. He has 108 targets in the 11 games this year, and he has 21 targets in the 2 games without Rashid Shaheed. On top of that, Tyler Shuck has been playing some decent football. 43 pass attempts last week, and we are getting the target alpha of the offense. Like, I understand in general you want to run against Miami, but Chris Olave gets way too much volume to turn down, and in my opinion, in PPR leagues, you have to consider him an every week top 12 guy. But moving on to tier number 4, this is what I classify as the high-end wide receiver 2s. A.J. Brown, who played on Friday, Emeka Egbuka, Tedoroa McMillan, Devontae Smith. and Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. And with A.J. Brown, I mean, it's pretty easy. I mean, you look at these last 3 games, 11 targets, 10 targets, 12 targets, wide receiver 21, wide receiver 5, wide receiver 1 on the slate. And obviously, we see the big-time spike against Chicago this week. He scores the second touchdown at the end of the game, and he's able to really pad that stat box. But all jokes aside, A.J. Brown, we need to revisit what our expectations are. I said for the longest time, okay, Devontae Smith objectively playing better football than A.J. Brown. And that was true until about week 11. And then since week 11, man, it's been the A.J. Brown show. I really do hope this is a sign to come moving forward, because if A.J. Brown's able to play up to the talent level we know he has, we could be looking at a top 5 to 8 type of wide receiver. I really do think that upside is in the range of outcomes. I really do think we could be talking about him as a tier 2 option. It's just up to A.J. at this point to prove it on a week-to-week basis. 14, we got Emeka Egbuka, and man, like, he's really tough to gauge. Because obviously when he was playing extremely well, you could argue he was outplaying his usage, man. 31.3 points, 20.1, 14.5, 20. Like, we're seeing great weeks from Emeka Egbuka in those first 5. And he's just been getting more volume than he was in that period. The issue, he's not playing nearly as well. 12 targets, 9 targets, 13 targets, 9 targets, 8 targets. That's exactly what you want from a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. The issue is we only see him pay off in one of those games. And I do think with Arizona, it's a much easier matchup than when we got with the Rams and with the Buffalo Bills. But at the same time, we just need Emeka Egbuka to play well. The passing game, iffy projection. Baker Mayfield leaves the game early last week. He is expected to start in this game. Just how healthy is that left shoulder? Again, good thing for Egbuka. At least it's on his non-throwing shoulder. And on top of that, maybe Chris Godwin gets more snaps. We've really seen defenses take a high priority on slowing down Emeka Egbuka. If Chris Godwin's playing up to the par we expect from him, maybe that can open up Egbuka moving forward. However, I just got to trust this usage, man. I know Egbuka is a good player. I knew the player that we've been seeing these last couple of weeks can be much better. So I do think unless he has another stinker, he needs to be viewed as a mid-end wide receiver too. Wide receiver 15, we got Tetairoa McMillan of the Carolina Panthers. He's up to 13.7 points per game this season. And as we see, man, he had that monster spike week. Wide receiver 2 on the week against Atlanta, and we saw what it looked like when he's at his best. 12 targets, 130 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. But specifically, the touchdown trend is very encouraging. As we see, in that first, 10-game stretch, only 2 receiving touchdowns. He has 3 in his last 2 weeks. And that's what you would expect, man. He's a 6'5" X-wide receiver that showed the ability to score at will in college. The issue for him, very tough matchup. But I'm just going to trust the prospect that I know, top 10 overall pick, the talent we've already seen on display, and the wide receiver 1 level usage. A near 30% target share on the year, and I think he has the upside to finish as a 16-plus point per game scorer down the stretch. Think of BTJ, think of Ladd McConkey in 2024. That's what I think Tetairoa McMillan's going to be for 2025. My wide receiver 16 was Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles, and the usage was good, 8 targets in this game. But he only comes up with 5 catches, 48 yards, and 9.8 fantasy points. This is the thing that we have to revisit, man, because A.J. Brown has been objectively better in each of the last 3 weeks. Devontae Smith was fantastic to start the season, so we're going to have to revisit. I'm going to have A.J. Brown higher moving forward. Again, this is going to be a week-to-week thing. If Devontae Smith plays well and A.J. Brown's bitching about Jalen Hurts next week, we might have to look at it again. But for the time being, the lesson that I learned from Friday is A.J. Brown is back to wide receiver 1. At wide receiver 17, we have Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. Honestly, this is where he should be. He's a mid-wide receiver 2 on the season. He's averaging less than 14 points per game. However, can Brosmer actually be an upgrade? Like, in all seriousness, I was wrong on J.J. McCarthy. He is not up to par when it comes to the NFL, and I'm just going to have to accept that. But Justin Jefferson was averaging 95 yards per game when Carson Wentz was the starter and only 53 yards per game with J.J. McCarthy. Is Brosmer what he needed? Like, can he pack a punch? Obviously, again, it's a very difficult matchup. He's going up against Seattle, but who knows, man? Maybe the quarterback changes what Jefferson needs, and maybe we see a 15-target, 20-plus PPR point. This is why I'm Justin Jefferson type of game from JJ. Moving on to the next tier, this is what I call the wide receiver 2-3s. Michael Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously of the Arizona Cardinals, Michael Pittman Jr., Zay Flowers, Wan'Dale Robinson, Rome Odunze, Brian Thomas Jr., and Jameson Williams. We will start off the top with the Arizona Cardinals duo. And yes, I have Michael Wilson ranked above Marvin Harrison Jr. this week. And look, I think eventually, probably next week, is when we see Marv reclaim his number 1 role. But I have to give credit where credit's due, man. Michael Wilson has taken the number 1 option role and completely thrived with it in these last couple of weeks. 33 targets, 25 receptions, and 55.3 fantasy points. I mean, we look at the box score here. This guy, top 10 wide receiver in 2 straight weeks. The overall volume that we're seeing. Jacoby Brissett is going to toss the pigskin, and when you combine that with a pass funnel Tampa Bay defense, I think there's enough volume for both these guys to eat, man. I prefer Michael Wilson. I think the role that he plays, he's the secure layup target, and I trust him to be able to hit with Jacoby Brissett, but I do think Marv's also going to have a good game. The team's going to be without Trey Benson yet again, and Bam Knight, Michael Carter, Amari DiMercado, obviously he's out, but like this stable of running back just can't give them consistent success on the ground. The way that they've made up for the lack of run game is through spreading defenses out and getting these playmakers the ball in space. So because of how good he's been, because of how integral he's been to the offensive success, I trust Michael Wilson to get there yet again. Give me the higher on his 4.5 reception projection, given just how involved he's been these last couple of weeks. Marv, he's a factor, but we don't know potentially if he's even limited. I do trust Marvin Harrison Jr., which is why I have him at 19, but I do think if you have to ask me straight up, I would be starting Michael Wilson this week. And speaking of Michael, we got Michael Pittman Jr. of the Indianapolis Colts. Very, very tough matchup going up against Houston. And I mean, when we look at the usage, he's been getting targets. Like we look through his last game logs, we're looking at 8 targets. Obviously, he has the bad game against Atlanta with only 2, but 8 targets, 12 targets, 9 targets, 9 targets. 8 plus targets in 4 of his last 5 games and 3 games of 20 plus fantasy points. Obviously 20.8, 23.5, 20.5, and he's able to contribute 13.7 against the Chiefs. We know he has touchdown equity. There is a big concern here, of course, with Daniel Jones. It does get reported this week he is suffering from a fractured fibula. But at the same time, Michael Pittman Jr., he's the layup guy. He gets red zone targets. And this Colts offense is still implied for nearly 25 points this week. At 21 is where Zay Flowers settled in. And man, like, I'm going to have to revisit this moving forward. Lamar Jackson has been an absolute mess. And Zay Flowers just isn't getting enough consequential work. 7 targets, 2 receptions, 6 receiving yards, and obviously that fumble, 0.6 fantasy points. This was a prime matchup, and Zay Flowers pissed down his leg. I mean, we're talking about 11.9 points per game. That is not going to cut it. So Zay Flowers moving forward, man, he's a fringe top 30 wide receiver. And a guy that's been much better than Zay Flowers is Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants. And man, like he has been really coming on with increased downfield usage. Like when you look at the game log for Wan'Dale, obviously last week he has that big spike week, 30.6 points, wide receiver 2 on the week. But we do still see the consistent production, man. 14 targets, 9 targets, 11 targets, 11 targets, 12 targets here. Like that's what, 9 plus targets in a 5 out of 6 game stretch. Like the guy has been absolutely fantastic. And Wan'Dale's quietly been top 10 in the NFL in terms of receiving yards. And he's been a top 20 wide receiver in fantasy this year. Like you wouldn't think of that of Wan'Dale, but we have to give flowers where flowers is due. And I mean, with Wan'Dale Robinson, when we look at the overall points per game, like he's been 13.6. That's better than Zay Flowers. That's better than Rome Odunze. That's better than BTJ, Jameson Williams. Obviously, Jameson we'll talk about in a second, but like he's averaging 0.2 less points per game than Justin Jefferson this year. Take that in. It is a tougher matchup, but if he's going to give you this level of production, this level of volume, he needs to be viewed as an every week top 25 guy. And man, I have to have a talk with Rome Odunze because I mean, this is just not going to cut it. 6 targets, 2 receptions, 8 receiving yards, 2.8 fantasy points. Like I just talked about it when it came to Zay Flowers, but Odunze hasn't been much better, man. 12.2 points per game this year, and it's completely fallen off a cliff since the bye. I don't know what to explain these troubles to because I mean, he's had 10 targets games. He's had, flashes, but it just isn't going to do it, man. He's been in single-digit scoring in all but 2 games since the bye week. Yeah, Philadelphia was a tough matchup. I don't know what it is, man. Him and Caleb cannot connect. We did see multiple times in the game on outbreaking routes. Caleb Williams was missing the mark. But if he's going to be this bad, dude, like Rome Odunze, we're going to have a serious talk, and you might very well be outside of the top 30 next week. If I knew just how much of an egg that Rome Odunze would have left, I would have had Brian Thomas Jr. ranked above him. But obviously, that's hindsight bias. BTJ, though, very, very good bounce back spot on the road against Tennessee. Yeah, he's been bad this year, but at the same time, the Titans have been worse. 8th worst in terms of fantasy points per game allowed to wide receivers, and they are currently the 4th worst in EPA per play against the pass. The Titans, they can't guard on the outside, and while Brian Thomas Jr., he's been a roller coaster this year, he's the unquestioned one with Travis Hunter off the field. And I do think, as bad as he's been, there's a real possibility he could be a league winner down the stretch. It obviously matters. How's the ankle feeling? Obviously the wrist, the back, the shoulder. I mean, he's been completely banged up this year. but I expect him to be healthy, and I love the projection over on underdog. I love him to go higher than 49.5, and I love BTJ to prove everybody just exactly how good he is. And then finally, Jameson Williams, again, another guy we're going to have a serious talk on, because obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown leaves the game with a low ankle sprain, and Jameson Williams took full advantage, man. 26.9 points. The only real stinker here, of course, I mean, you look at 2 goose eggs in the stretch, obviously not ideal, but since week 6, man, games of 18.6, 16.6, 23.9, 19.7, and obviously drops the 26.9 bomb. He's going to be volatile, but with the Moussa feed really getting eliminated from this offense, he's going to be the number one on a very good team. We could be talking about Jameson Williams as a legitimate top 8 to 12 wide receiver moving forward until Amon-Ra is back in the lineup. Gibbs, he's going to get receptions out of the backfield, but Jameson Williams is going to be the number one on this team. No Laporta for the year, and probably no Amon-Ra St. Brown, at least against Dallas. Against Dallas next week, we could be talking about a top 5 wide receiver, honestly. But moving down a tier, we got the wide receiver 3s in my rankings this week. Troy Franklin, Stephon Diggs, Christian Watson obviously played on Thursday, Courtland Sutton, Khalil Shakir, Deebo Samuel, Quentin Johnson, and Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons. We will start off the top with Troy Franklin. And yes, I do have him ranked straight above Courtland Sutton. And realistically, when I'm looking at it since week 7, Troy Franklin has just been straight up better. Sure, the overall fantasy points per game skewed by the touchdown equity, but Washington is dead last in EPA per play against the pass, and they allow the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Given the matchup, I obviously like both these wide receivers a ton, but at this point, we need to be treating Franklin like the one. Until Sutton really has that game that he says, hey, I'm Sutton, I'm the number 1 wide receiver on this team. Like, Franklin's just straight up and better, and I'd be doing a disservice if I had him ranked below Sutton. 27, Stephon Diggs, extremely confusing route rate last week. Like, we looked at a situation where Stephon Diggs, man, he was becoming a near full-time route player. Like we look in the game logs, man, and this guy was playing a much higher snap share for a bunch of straight games. Like, realistically, he peaked at, I know it says a 72% snap share, an 89% route share in week 11, and that dropped off to a 54% route share last week. Look, I don't know what to make of it. If I knew he was getting full-time routes, Stephon Diggs would legitimately be a top 12, top 15 type of wide receiver in my rankings. He's got an MVP quarterback, and he has a 24% target rate when he's on the field. The issue, though, I don't know what to make of his snaps, and I do think until we see consistent use as a 75+, 80+% route share player, he needs to be considered a volatile wide receiver 3. I still believe in him. I'm still willing to give the benefit of the doubt. I mean, he had 5 straight double-digit scoring weeks. But last week was just so confusing, man. Like, you laid an egg and you barely played against the Cincinnati Bengals after everyone in the industry probably had you as a top 12 wide receiver on the week. And obviously, Christian Watson had the monster performance on Thursday. I mean, the Packers were just absolutely bludgeoning the Lions on those deep attempts. 4 catches, 80 yards, gets that receiving touchdown. And we've seen 2 out of 3 big-time weeks from Watson. The wide receiver is 6 in fantasy in week 11, and he has another close week to that this week, man. We're going to have to reevaluate. Romeo Doubs has been losing his targets to Christian Watson. Watson has developed to the number 1 on this team. And even though I had Watson ranked higher straight up this week, I think the gap has to be even bigger. Next up, we got Courtland Sutton. Again, I already talked about it through Franklin, but I do think Franklin needs to be ranked as the wide receiver 1 moving forward. However, this is an elite matchup, and Sutton is due for touchdown regression. The Broncos, they're trying to lock up the 1 seed. And I think they go back to what was working. Again, Franklin, I do expect to be the one. But we do know Sutton, he brings the size, he brings the ability at the catch point, and I do think he's due, like I said, for a touchdown. Wide receiver 30, we got Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills traveling on the road to play the Pittsburgh Steelers. He obviously has that down week in week 11, but he has been a double-digit PPR scorer in 7 of his last 9 games. We look at the game log for Khalil Shakir, man, and he has been exactly what you needed. Wide receiver 12 on the week, wide receiver 28, wide receiver 33, wide receiver 6. Like, sure, he's going to have these down weeks where he doesn't rank as, a wide receiver 3 or better, but at the same time, he's attached to a great offense, and he has spike week appeal. We do have a great matchup, a pass funnel Steelers defense. The Bills, they're trying to make ground in terms of the AFC East. Realistically, this is the Patriots division right now, and the Bills need to keep winning. And I do think given his recent involvement, we continue to see Shakir operate as the true engine in this passing attack. Next up at 31, we got Deebo Samuel of the Washington Commanders, and this is really where I had to rank him because I don't know what to make of the situation, man. With Deebo Samuel, obviously he's been playing better than this. 14.1 points per game on the year should be higher than wide receiver 31. But context matters, man. This is the number 3 pass defense in terms of EPA against the pass and the number 1 defense against fantasy wide receivers. On top of that, Terry McLaurin making his return to the lineup. No Jaden Daniels back in the lineup. Like, it's going to be tough. Can Marcus Mariota support 2 wide receivers? I do prefer Deebo Samuel to Terry McLaurin straight up. But who's to say that he outproduces Terry McLaurin? This is going to be a crucial week. If Deebo goes out there, if he balls in this tough matchup, he's going to be a top 24 weekly wide receiver. But if he goes out there and Terry McLaurin's getting a number 1 target share workload, then we have to revisit Deebo going forward. Moving on to wide receiver 32, we got Quentin Johnson of the LA Chargers going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. As we see, he put up 15.9 points against them in their last matchup, top 24 wide receiver on the week. But to be honest, it's been a season of ups and downs when it comes to Quentin Johnson. A lot more downs as of late. But on the same time, we do see a 15.3 point week against Tennessee a couple weeks ago, and we do see 10 targets against the Steelers. No denying the goose egg he had against Jacksonville, not what we want to see, but that was a game where everybody on the Chargers were getting ran. And Quentin Johnson, he is the ceiling raiser of this offense. I do think in a much more favorable environment, we could see a deep score in this game. Now, wide receiver 33, we got Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons. No Drake London yet again, and this is a very easy matchup on paper. The Jets, since they lost Sauce Gardner, they cannot guard on the outside. However, I do have my question marks because this is a very bad game environment, only a 39.5 over-under. They are on the road. And this could very well be a situation, given the fact that we saw only 23 Cousins attempts last week, that they rely upon Bijan Robinson in the ground game. I do think we could see more overall passing volume given the potential gain script in this game. Again, keep in mind last week, Falcons went up early, really ran the ball against the New Orleans Saints. I could see the inverse happening against the Jets. Jets keep this competitive, and we saw Darnell Mooney, even despite only 3 targets, have the trust of Kirk Cousins down the field. He was able to pay off the touchdown. If we can get, the 15 targets he had the previous 2 weeks on top of the level of play we saw from Mooney last week, we could even be talking about a top 24 with London not on the field. But moving on to the flexes, Alec Pierce, Jacoby Myers, Jawan Jennings, Romeo Doubs, Xavier Worthy, DK Metcalf, and DJ Moore. Obviously, half these guys did play. You know what? Just for you guys, just for this sake, because there was 4 games on Thursday and Friday, I'll be going to 45 this week. So we'll talk about this tier, and then we'll quickly breeze through the 41 through 45 range. But we'll start with 34 with Alec Pierce, man. He's coming off a very bad week. He does have a very tough matchup going up against Houston. But it's tough to deny just how good he was going into that week. I mean, realistically, since week 6, he has earned top 35 wide receiver status. Over 73 yards per game in that stretch, and he's running over 33 routes per game. The health of Daniel Jones is going to be a concern. Obviously, he has that fractured fibula. We know the nature of Alec Pierce, downfield wide receiver, but at the same time, man, I mean, look at these game logs. Like 10 targets, 5 catches, 98 yards. 5 targets, 2 catches, 69 yards. 13-6, 115. 7-4, 84. Like, yeah, you get the 2 target, 1 catch game this week, but the Chiefs, they're good against wide receivers. Obviously, Dallas didn't make it look like that this year, but man, I'm just willing to give Pierce the benefit of the doubt. He's played way too well for me to turn on him after 1 bad game. Next up is Jacoby Myers of the Jacksonville Jaguars going to play the Tennessee Titans, and we saw a return with 91% of the routes this past week. Like, we go to Jacoby Myers since he got traded over. So the last 2 weeks, he's been a top 24 wide receiver, and he peaked at 85% of the snaps this past week. The elephant in the room, Brian Thomas Jr. back. How does that impact Jacoby Myers? But I do think he could do a lot of the same stuff they were trying to do with Travis Hunter. Be that layup guy across the middle of the field, use him in the yak game, and Jacoby Myers is just a damn good wide receiver. I do think we could be talking about 2 top 30 Jaguars wide receivers as Trevor Lawrence picks up his level of play. It's going to be the best receiver core he's worked with since both Travis Hunter and Brian Thomas Jr. went down, so we'll see what it looks like on the field. 36, Jawan Jennings, and I'm going to give a little bit of respect when it comes to the Cleveland pass defense, but at the same time, Jawan Jennings, he has been a touchdown magnet in the red zone. It's not flashy, but if you need a flex, he gets targets in the red zone. He's got size on the outside. Sure, he's not going to get the targets that you maybe see from other players. Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, they're going to eat into that target share, but he's also averaged 12.8 points per game in his last 5. And these next 2, 37, Romeo Doubs, 38, Xavier Worthy. Doubs obviously went up against the Lions on the road, Worthy up against the Dallas Cowboys. Both scored very similar point projections there. 12 PPR points from from Dobbs, 11.4 from Xavier Worthy. Yeah, I mean, basically what you expected. Dobbs, unfortunately, losing targets to Christian Watson, but does get there on that goal line touchdown. Xavier Worthy, quietly one of his better games as of late, catching that deep play on the broken play that was made from Patrick Mahomes. Deep ball down the field. Maybe, yeah, we're nitpicking Xavier Worthy. You probably should have scored on that play, but at the same time, 11.4 you will take from a flex. And speaking of low-end flex, man, DK Metcalf was already trending this way even when he was fully healthy. Now he tweaks his ankle again. I do expect him to play, but albeit it's a tough matchup. The Buffalo Bills have been very good against wide receivers this year. Like, he hasn't posted over 50 yards, over 15 fantasy points since week 8. He has only one 20-plus point week this year. DK Metcalf is a glorified tight end. Like, until you actually contribute on the outside, until you actually contribute a consistent amount of yards, like, look at this dude. This guy has just been, like I said, a glorified tight end. 22 receiving yards, 49 receiving yards, 35, 6, 55, 50. Again, only one game with over 100, only 2 games with over 90 this year, dude. Like, this just frankly is not going to cut it from a supposed number 1 wide receiver. And I'm going to take the lower yet again, man. 47.5 receiving yards. He's done that, once in his last 4 weeks? Against a very difficult matchup with the Bills, shadow potential coverage from Christian Benford. Give me the lower, dude. 47.5. I will take the lower on that projection all day over on Underdog. And then finally at 40, we had DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. Obviously played the Philadelphia Eagles. Big time upset on the link. Not the greatest day from DJ Moore. 5 targets, 2 receptions, 17 receiving yards. Like, you were hoping that coming off of that huge game a couple weeks ago, obviously 2 weeks ago, 5 for 64 and 2 touchdowns, you're hoping he was going to keep that momentum. Obviously a much more challenging matchup, but knowing that he reverted back to the DJ Moore we've seen all year, definitely a big-time disappointment if you started him. Like I mentioned, we'll rapid fire through the 40 through 45 range. John Mechie of the New York Jets. I mean, he's been a wide receiver 1 for them in these last couple of weeks. We look at the overall production, the overall usage, wide receiver 18, wide receiver 10, and we do see 80+% of the snaps in each of the weeks. He has scored touchdowns, but he is coming off of 7 targets against the Baltimore Ravens, so we do like him as a low-end flex option, especially in deep PPRs. Jaden Higgins, we are seeing his snaps go up, and I would argue that he's the second best receiver on this team. We know that Nico Collins is an alpha, but I do love what I've seen from Jaden Higgins. Also gets usage in terms of end zone targets. Ricky Pearsall, he's been on the downslope, but I trust the talent to be able to win out. It is a challenging matchup, but when he's on, he's got top 30 upside. Andre Yoshivas obviously played on Thursday night. Catches that 29-yard touchdown, but doesn't do anything else in the game. I did expect a little bit more. Obviously, with no T. Higgins in the lineup, I was expecting more usage. At the same time, we saw a rotating cast of Cincy wide receivers, and we're probably going to get T. Higgins back next week. So if you picked up Andre Yoshivas, unfortunately, probably going to be a bust in terms of your pickup acquisition. Trey Tucker, and he's been the wide receiver 1 in terms of the Raiders, but at the same time, just how valuable has that been? He paid off against the Dallas Cowboys, but at the same time, he's been, a fringe top 50 wide receiver outside of a couple outlier weeks. So I'll have him here out of respect that he could pop a big play, but realistically, Chargers are a tough matchup, and at this point, he kind of blends in with the rest of the guys under him. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below, comment your biggest start sit decision. I'll try to get to as many as possible, and of course, if you're new, hit that subscribe button. We are on the road to 100,000 subscribers. Appreciate you guys for that continued support. I did mention my pickup entry on this video. Michael Wilson, higher than 4.5 receptions. Brian Thomas Jr., higher than 49.5 receiving yards. DK Metcalf, lower than 47.5 receiving yards. And then Ladd McConkey, higher than 10.25 fantasy points. Taylor fade my picks today with promo code FSC. The links are in the description. But with that being said, peace out. Good luck in your Week 13 matchups.